when this is something that goes to the fundamental power that each of us has, why have we all forgotten it or never been told it?
I think largely that's because we've had it educated out of us. And so we were just talking about that before, and why is that the case? I think there's been some fun and games going on behind the scenes, because it's not good for a political power to have a citizenry that is properly aware of its constitutional powers. So,
but it is true, is it not, that it is the people, it's never Parliament that's sovereign.
Correct.
It's always it's not meant to be
correct.
Parliament.
Yes. As long as your constitution is based on common law, that would be described as a proper democratic constitution, not because of voting in elections. And we'll come on about that later, because that's actually adult suffrage. But the term democracy actually means something else. So there's another concealed, hidden mechanism within the Constitution that's sort of been rather airbrushed out of our consciousness over a very long period of time.
And that, as I mentioned and touched on at the top of the show, it is the jury, isn't
yes.
it? That people just think they just go in there, 12 obedient people, judge more or less tells them what to do, and there's a verdict, and that's an end of it.
Yes.
But what is the function of the jury, really?
Yeah, so the jury, I mean, we all know the first function of the jury, which is essentially to judge the accused person before the court. But the hidden, concealed second purpose of the jury, that's the key. And what that is actually to judge the justice of the piece of legislation that brought the defendant into court. So to put that another way, you're actually, as a jury, judging two things. So when the defendant comes into court, you're judging the defendant, but you're kind of weighing that and balancing it against the piece of legislation, the statute, that actually brought them into court. And the jury has the right, the independent right, to judge on the justice of that piece of legislation as well.
So the jury is not bound by that legislation?
No.
In any sense?
No, not at all. Absolutely not. So this is called jury independence. Now, I mean, they're a bit coy about this, and that's why we're not being told. It's a very concealed concept. And generally speaking, juries are not told of their power and their right to judge the justice of the law. But they are absolutely, they have the right to judge on that independently of the legislation.
So, you know, in the last couple of years, when legislation was coming down and there was emergency powers and all of the rest of it, and we were invited to think that, well, it's an emergency and you'll just have to do what you're told.
Yes.
That wasn't the case in terms of the independence of the jury.
Well, OK, so it's a little bit more complicated than that, simply because as soon as they shouldn't be passing legislation through Parliament, through the legislature, and there are a number of checks and balances that are meant to be in place to make sure that legislation, acts of Parliament that are proposed through bills of Parliament are meant to be checked, first in the upper house and then, of course, through the royal prerogative. And a lot of people get a bit fussy about the royal prerogative, but they don't actually realise that that's a protection mechanism for legislation that would be contrary to the Constitution and contrary to the liberties of the people.
We are invited, aren't we, to think that the Crown, the monarch, is just a figurehead. But that's not...
No.
And cannot be true.
No, they're the highest ranking public servant in the land. They're the first among equals.
And whose side are they meant to be on?
Well, they're meant to be on the people's. They're meant to be protecting the people's liberties. Yeah, absolutely. That's the point of the Constitution.
And so
they are the sovereign, but they cede sovereignty to the people through that power of jury independence, trial by jury. That's how it's meant to work.
And so,
not how it's working now.
And so in terms of, you know, when what happened while we were within the European Union,
yeah,
how lawful was that the national final decision-making power, the sovereignty, was ceded to Brussels?
Yeah, completely unlawful, yeah. Yeah, absolutely contrary to the Constitution.
I mean, is this a functioning democracy or not?
OK, so it depends on what you mean by the term democracy, because there's been a bit of a twist in that word. And, of course, we're taught, or conditioned, if you like, into thinking that the term democracy actually is all about voting in elections. It's about the majority vote, and it's not, actually. That is adult suffrage. The real meaning of democracy is specifically the emplacement of a mechanism into your constitution that allows the people, through the jury, to be the final arbiter of law. And that tradition goes all the way back through early England, the English constitutional common law, prior to 1215 Magna Carta, the late Saxon kings, into Europe as well. Most of the European nations were functioning on common law as well. And then even back into the Athenian constitution in Greece.
Nick, we've been hoodwinked, have we not? Or is it just me that we don't get told this? We're not invited to know this about the powers that we have, which strikes me as fundamentally sinister. All these powers are there in our Constitution, which we are supposed to care about. But if you actually make people aware of what's in the Constitution, it fairly knocks the knees out from the government.
I mean, I suppose I'd probably put it on the other... I'd probably put it like this. I mean, you know, voting in a general election is like, what, usually about 60% turnout, something like that? So we can't even get people... All they have to do is go to a ballot box and, you know, vote for somebody, and actually just getting them to care that much about it. I remember trying to register people outside of an ASDA once. Oh, my God. I mean, just literally just, can you just take this form? I don't do that. That's not for me. Like as if I was trying to sell them something. It was remarkable.
Emma, it's dismal, isn't it? The disenfranchisement of
think
people from their own power.
It's that, and also, you know, it's even though people have the power to vote, most people know, well, we're political nomads especially after the last 3 years, and even before that, the last decade, is, well, what are you voting for? Who are we voting for? Do we trust who we're voting for? And, you know, the behaviour, it's just been an absolute, suspect of incompetence. And it's like, well, how do you know who to vote for?
As Nick says, no wonder people get disenchanted by it, because it changes nothing. And so people have that pushed at them. Oh, vote, yes, vote. That's your decision-making power. And what's being hidden from them is the fact that regardless of what the government is, you can intervene at any stage via the jury to say, that legislation's nonsense.
It's a much more direct power, constitutionally, that we actually have. That's how the people have the authority over their own governing administration, through that mechanism. But the whole sort of introduction and the increase in the size and stature of Parliament is, in a way, all about that obfuscation and that confusion in the minds of the people. In that, actually, we've now arrived at a situation where we believe that the influence, and that's really all it is a little bit of influence here and there, is actually through this mechanism of voting in elections. But actually, when you think about that system, the party political system, really only emerged in the sort of mid-1700s. And yet we talk about democracy as something, having come from this sort of ancient history going back to the time of Greece. It's actually the time of Cleisthenes. It's prior to Plato and Socrates.